My son smirked when he said it. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one. A practiced, confident curve of the lips like he was sharing a minor scheduling detail. Not carving something essential out of my life. You're not coming to the wedding. Mother, he stood in my kitchen while he said it. My kitchen. The narrow hallway behind him, the old clock ticking too loudly like it always does at night. He wore a clean suit, well-fitted, the kind I once paid for when he needed to look professional. His posture was relaxed, already halfway gone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain much. He didn't need to. That was the moment I understood something clearly and without drama. He wasn't afraid of hurting me. He was certain I would endure it. Certainty is easy to recognize when you're 72. It has a sound, a stillness. He spoke about the venue very specific. The guest list carefully curated. The atmosphere important for his future. He said it the way men speak when they believe they're being reasonable, when they believe logic absolves them of cruelty. He avoided my eyes. Not out of shame. Out of convenience, I asked one question. Just one. Have you already told everyone I'm not coming? He hesitated. Half a second. Then nodded. It's easier this way. That word stayed with me. Easier. Easier for whom? I stood there in the house I paid off 30 years ago. The house he learned to walk in. The house he now visited like a guest expecting coffee, never offering to wash the cup. He reminded me that his fiance's family was very particular, that appearances mattered, that people asked questions. He said I wouldn't feel comfortable anyway. He said it gently, as if protecting me from something unpleasant, as if exclusion were kindness when delivered softly. I nodded. I have nodded my whole life. Nodding keeps conversations short. It keeps sons calm when he left. He kissed my cheek the way you kiss an elderly aunt at a funeral. Quick, careful, relieved, it's over. I watched him walk down the path without looking back. He didn't notice the loose stone near the gate. He never does. He assumes the ground will always hold. I made tea. I always make tea when I don't know what else to do with my hands. The kettle screamed louder than necessary. I let it. Some sounds deserve to exist. On the table lay the wedding invitation I had never officially received. It arrived by mistake. Cream paper. Gold edges. Elegant restraint. My name missing. Just household. I studied it like a document from a country I no longer belonged to. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. Anger is noisy. What I felt was quiet, solid, unfamiliar. Like standing up after sitting too. Long and realizing your legs still work? That night, I folded the invitation neatly and placed it in the drawer where I keep important papers, deeds, statements, and the envelope with my will list updated years ago. Back when I still believed love and gratitude aged at the same pace. I didn't cry. I slept deeply, like someone who had finally understood what was required of her. Asterisk the next morning. I woke earlier than usual, not from worry, not from sadness, from clarity. It settles in the body. Differently, like cool air entering a room that's been stuffy for years. You don't gasp. You breathe easier without realizing why. I dressed simply. Gray slacks. A soft cardigan. Shoes I could walk in without thinking about my feet. I have never trusted important decisions to uncomfortable shoes. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked the same as always. Lined face, steady eyes, white hair pinned back the way I like it. No visible sign that anything had shifted. That is how real change usually looks. I checked my calendar. The wedding date was written there neatly. Careful handwriting from a time when I still assumed I would be present. I did not cross it out. I do not erase facts just because they hurt. Instead, I picked up my handbag and went out. The bank was quiet at that hour. A few retirees. A young couple whispering over a loan application. A teller who recognized me immediately. I have been with that bank longer than most of its employees have been alive. There is comfort in being known without explanation. As I waited, I thought about how many times I had sat in places like this for my son. Student loans, a first car, a business idea that never made it past enthusiasm. I signed papers without asking too many questions because he was my child. And I believed support was a form of love. When my turn came, I asked for a private room. My voice didn't tremble. That surprised the young man who escorted me, as if he expected hesitation from someone my age. People often confuse age with fragility. It is a convenient mistake. I asked to review my accounts. All of them, not because I didn't know what was there, but because I wanted to see it laid out plainly. Numbers tell the truth without sentiment. They showed years of discipline, restraint, careful planning. They also showed patterns, regular transfers, standing permissions, access I had granted without thinking it might one day be used against my own dignity. I didn't change anything that day. I only asked questions, quiet ones, practical ones. What could be altered? What required notice? What was reversible? What was not knowledge first, action later? That has always been my way. On the walk home, I passed a bridal shop. The windows were full of white dresses and exaggerated joy. A group of young women stood outside laughing, phones in hand, imagining futures that still believed love was always visible and always fair. I wished them well. Genuinely, life would teach them the rest. At home, the phone rang twice. I let it ring. No message was left. Silence, I have learned, is also a form of communication. I spent the afternoon sorting papers. Not dramatically. Not with shaking hands. Old warranties. Instruction manuals for appliances long replaced. At the bottom of the drawer lay the envelope with my will-thick paper. Legal language. A version of myself written by a woman who still hoped to be chosen. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready to read words written by someone who believed presence, guaranteed appreciation. That evening, I cooked soup for one, slow, patient, the way my mother taught me. As I ate, I realized something else, something equally important. My son hadn't just excluded me from a wedding, he had made a decision about where I belonged. And for the first time in my life, I was considering whether I agreed with him that night. I wrote a short list on a piece of paper. Names, appointments, tasks, not revenge, preparation. When? I turned off the light. The house felt the same, but I did not. I felt like someone who had finally stopped waiting to be invited, started deciding where she would stand. By the third day, the news had settled into my bones the way weather does before a storm. Not dramatic, predictable. People imagine betrayal arrives loudly. It doesn't. It arrives as confirmation of things you already knew but were polite enough not to say out loud. My son did not call. That, too, told me something. I went about my routines, watered the plants, folded the laundry. I no longer separated his from mine. When you live alone long enough, you stop pretending space is temporary. It becomes honest. Around noon, I drove across town to the small office building near the courthouse. Beige walls, low ceilings. The kind of place that never tries to impress anyone. My lawyer had worked there for decades. He helped me after my husband died. Helped me set things up so I would never have to ask my child for help in my old age. Irony has patience. He looked older than I remembered. So did I. We greeted each other without warmth or distance. To people who understood why the meeting mattered, I'd like to review my will, I said. He didn't ask why. Good lawyers rarely do. He only asked when it was last updated. I told him. He nodded before I finished, already knowing the answer. Wills written by hopeful parents all sound the same. As he retrieved the file. I studied my hands. They were steady. These hands had scrubbed floors, counted cash late at night, signed contracts I barely understood at the time, but honored anyway. They had held my son when he was small and incapable of smirking at anyone. We read through the document together, clause by clause, beneficiaries, contingencies, assumptions. It was written by a woman who believed effort was always seen, who believed proximity guaranteed loyalty, who assumed gratitude matured naturally, like fruit on a tree. I asked questions. Practical ones. What could be changed immediately? What required witnesses? What protections could be put in place? I did not speak of feelings. This was not about punishment. This was about accuracy. At one point, he looked at me carefully and said, "You seem very certain." I smiled, not proudly. Honestly, I've never been more precise. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. The cashier chatted about the upcoming wedding season, how exhausting it must be to host family from out of town. I nodded politely. There is no need to burden strangers with truths they cannot carry. That evening, my phone finally rang. My son's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Old habits die slowly. He sounded distracted. Busy? He asked how I was, then moved quickly into logistics, seating arrangements, timing, small details that assumed the larger decision was settled. He spoke as if exclusion were already complete, a problem he no longer needed to manage. At the end, he said, "You understand, right?" I looked around my living room. The framed photos. The lamp I repaired myself instead of replacing. The life I built without shortcuts. "Yes," I said. "I understand." Relief flooded his voice. He thanked me for being reasonable. After we hung up, I sat very still. Reasonable, I realized, often what people call you when you make their choices easier. It has nothing to do with fairness. I took out the list I had written days earlier and added one more name, one more appointment. Outside, the evening was quiet. Somewhere across town, my son was planning a celebration that required my absence. He believed the hardest part was over. He was wrong, but not in the way people usually are. This would not end loudly. It would end correctly. Asterisk. The wedding was 4 days away when he came to see me again. He didn't call first. He never does when he believes he has the right to enter a space. I heard his car before the knock, the engine cutting off to sharply impatience disguised as urgency. I opened the door before he rang the bell. People are often surprised when they expect resistance and meet readiness instead. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. His eyes moved quickly around the room, checking for change. There was none. That unsettled him more than disorder ever would have. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said. His tone was careful, practiced. "This week must be strange for you." I nodded, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "It is a week," I said, "like any other." He smiled, relieved. Calm reassures people who are doing something cruel. It tells them they won't be held accountable emotionally. He sat at the table where he used to do homework, where I once taught him how to count change properly so customers wouldn't cheat him at the shop. He folded his hands and leaned forward. The posture of a man about to make a reasonable request. "I wanted to talk about a few practical things," he said, "just in case." There it was, practical. The word men use when they want something but don't want to ask. He spoke about travel arrangements for relatives, final payments, how complicated weddings are financially. He never mentioned love, never mentioned vows, only logistics, only money. At one point he said, "You've always been so good at handling these things." "I've handled my own things," I corrected quietly. He waved it off with a small laugh. "You know what I mean?" Yes, I did. He asked if I had received all the information I needed, if I was comfortable staying home that day, if I had someone to call, if I felt lonely. Each question was wrapped in concern but aimed at reassurance for himself. "Not me," I answered briefly. I did not explain. Explanation invites negotiation. Then he said the thing he had really come to say: "We'll talk properly after the wedding. When everything settles down. After? Always after. After the event, after the damage, after the moment when speaking up would have mattered." I stood and began clearing the already clean table. He stiffened. He preferred me seated, listening, available. "There's nothing we need to talk about later," I said. He frowned. "Of course there is. We're family." I turned to face him. My voice did not rise. "Families talk before decisions," I said. "Not after." For the first time, his smile faltered. Just slightly. enough to show confusion. He was not used to resistance that didn't announce itself loudly. He stood as well, suddenly uneasy. "You're not upset, are you?" I thought about that. About how people mistake dignity for indifference. "No," I said. "I'm attentive." The word landed differently. Attentive suggests observation, memory, consequence. He didn't like it. He left shortly after. Hugged me briefly. Awkwardly, his mind was already elsewhere arranging flowers, rehearsing speeches, stepping into a future where my presence was unnecessary. When the door closed, I did not rush to sit down. I stood there for a moment listening to the quiet. Quiet reveals what noise hides. I went to my desk and opened the drawer. Inside lay the papers I had reviewed days earlier, neatly stacked. Waiting, I placed a note on top. Written in steady handwriting, "Do not confuse calm with consent." Then I closed the drawer. That night, I slept without dreams, not because there was nothing left to process, but because my mind had finally stopped arguing with reality, The day of the wedding arrived quietly for me. No rush. No dress hanging on the door. No schedule to obey. I woke at my usual hour, made my bed, and opened the curtains just enough to let the morning in without inviting it to stay. Somewhere across town, people were already adjusting flowers and checking seating charts. Somewhere, my son was tying a tie he didn't know how to knot without help. I wondered briefly who was standing close enough to fix it for him. I made coffee instead of tea that morning. Strong, bitter, honest. I drank it slowly at the kitchen table, listening to the house breathe. Old houses do that. They settle. They remind you they are still alive even when others forget. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "We're starting soon. Hope you're doing okay." No apology. No hesitation. A courtesy notification. Like an automated reminder, I placed the phone face down and did not reply late in the morning. I walked through the rooms of my house, not searching, not reminiscing, just acknowledging. The bedroom where I had slept alone for years without complaint. The spare room he once claimed would be his if he ever needed it, though he never did. The small back room where I kept my documents. It's organized carefully because chaos has a way of finding widows. Around noon, I dressed. Not in mourning, not in celebration. Clean clothes, a coat that fit me properly. I had an appointment. The notary's office was calm and professional, the kind of place where people speak softly because words carry weight there. I signed what needed signing. Witnesses nodded. Pages were stamped. Nothing dramatic happened. No tears. No speeches. No second dash guessing dot. When it was done, I felt neither lighter nor heavier. I felt finished with something. On the way home, church bells rang. I didn't know which church. I didn't need to. Bells ring for many reasons. They're not always for you. Back in my kitchen, I heated soup and ate standing up. I have always eaten better standing. It keeps me from lingering in thoughts that no longer serve me. In the afternoon, I allowed myself one indulgence. I took out an old photo album, not to revisit memories, but to acknowledge them. I skipped the pages with him as a child. I focused instead on myself. There I was younger, standing beside a storefront I had opened with my own money. There I was, tired, proud, complete. Before motherhood narrowed my definition. At 3 o'clock, the phone rang again. This time, he called. "Everything's going beautifully," he said. Music and voices hummed behind him. Relief coated his words. I just wanted to check in. "I'm fine," I said. He paused, as if expecting gratitude or reassurance. "Well," he said finally, "we'll talk after." "Yes," I replied. "After." We hung up as evening settled. I turned on a lamp and sat in my chair by the window. Neighbors passed, unaware that anything important had happened at all. That is how most turning points occur. Quietly. Unwitnessed. I did not imagine the wedding. I did not picture the bride or the guests. I did not wonder whether he missed me. That question no longer mattered. On my desk sat a folder. Closed, final, accurate. That night, while music played for others, I slept peacefully. not because I had been excluded, but because I had finally excluded what no longer belonged in my life. Asterisk. The morning after the wedding felt no different at first. The same light slipped through the curtains. The same ache settled into my knees when I stood too quickly. The world is not obligated to mark your private conclusions. What changed was how I moved through it. I did not wait for a call. I did not check my phone every few minutes the way I used to. Anticipating updates I pretended I didn't care about. I made breakfast, washed the cup, and sat at the table with my papers spread neatly in front of me. Today was for follow-through at 9 sharp. I called the bank. The woman who answered knew my name. She always did. I asked to speak with the advisor who handled long-term accounts. When he came on the line, his voice was warm, professional, steady. People like that are trained to hear finality before it's spoken. I'd like to review access permissions on my accounts, I said. There was a pause. Not alarm, attention. I asked who could see what, who could move money, how quickly that could be changed. Automatic transfers, emergency authorizations, standing permissions granted years ago. Back when my son still asked instead of assumed by the end of the call, we had a list. Precise, clean. Would you like to make changes now? He asked. Not all of them, I said. Not yet. He accepted that without question. Money professionals understand timing. Power lies not in haste, but in sequence. Late that morning, a delivery arrived. A large envelope from the wedding planner. Inside was a polite note thanking me for my support and enclosing copies of finalized invoices. My name was on them. No confusion there. I looked at the total without flinching. Numbers only sting when you pretend not to see them. At noon, my son called. His voice sounded different now, less buoyant. The performance was over. Well, he said, forcing a laugh, it's done. We survived. I'm sure you did, I replied. He talked for a while about guests, speeches, how exhausting it all was. He never once asked how my day had been. That, too, was familiar. Then he cleared his throat. There are a few things we should go over, he said. Some of the expenses came in higher than expected. Of course they did. I let him finish. Silence unsettles people who rely on momentum. When he stopped talking, I said, I'm aware. You are. Relief rushed into his voice. Good. I thought maybe we could sit down next week. No, I said gently. The word surprised him. It always does. No. He repeated. I won't be going over anything next week, I said, or the week after. A pause. Longer this time. What do you mean? His voice tightened. These are things we need to handle. They're things you need to handle, I corrected. I'm done handling them. He laughed sharp and short. Come on. You don't mean that? I looked out the window while he spoke, watching a bird hop along the fence. Completely uninterested in our conversation. I mean exactly what I say, I replied. Irritation seeped through his voice now. You're upset. This is about the wedding. No, I said. This is about the years before it. That silenced him. He did not have a script for that sentence. He ended the call soon after, promising we'd talk later. He always promises that. It costs him nothing. I set the phone down and returned to my papers. I made notes, checked dates, lined up steps. Nothing rushed, nothing impulsive. That afternoon, I scheduled one more appointment. The most important one. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel vengeful. I felt accurate and accuracy. I have learned frightens people far more than anger ever could. People far more than anger ever could. By the time my next appointment arrived, the urgency had drained out of everything. That is how you know you are ready. Decisions made in panic always ask to be undone. Decisions made in calm ask only to be respected. The office was on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. No elevator. I took the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, not because I was weak, but because haste has never rewarded me. The plaque on the door was modest. No grand name, just a profession and a surname. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and furniture polish. Order, permanence. The man who greeted me was younger than my son. That amused me. Age rearranges authority in unexpected ways. He did not talk down to me. He did not soften his words. That alone told me I had chosen correctly. We sat across from each other, a wide desk between us. I placed my folder down and opened it myself. I prefer to control the order in which things are revealed. I want to make sure my wishes are followed exactly, I said. Not emotionally, legally. He nodded. People expect grief or anger in moments like this. They do not expect precision. We went through everything slowly: assets, accounts, property, contingencies. I answered questions clearly, sometimes correcting his assumptions before he finished forming them. He learned quickly not to interrupt. At one point, he said carefully, this may come as a surprise to your son. I looked at him without expression. My son has confused surprise with consequence for most of his life, I said. I'm correcting that. There was no judgment in the room after that. Only work. We discussed protections, structures that prevented reinterpretation later. Clauses that left no room for persuasion, guilt, or charm. I was not interested in drama after my time was done. I wanted silence, finality, a clean line no one could step over. When he asked if I wanted to leave a letter, I declined. I've spent years explaining myself, I said. Anyone who still doesn't understand isn't confused. They're unwilling. He accepted that when I left. The sun had shifted. Late afternoon light is less forgiving, more honest. I walked 2 blocks to my car and sat there for a moment before turning the key, letting the quiet settle fully into my chest. On the drive home, my phone buzzed twice. Can you call me when you have a minute? This is important. I did not respond at home. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly at the sink. My hands were steady, my breathing even. Whatever storm he was experiencing, it no longer required my management. That evening, a message arrived from a distant relative: congratulations on the wedding. A comment about how proud I must be. I replied politely. Pride, like love, does not need to be announced to be real. I spent the rest of the night doing ordinary things. Folding laundry. Reading a few pages of a book I had started months ago and never finished. Ordinary things become precious when you stop performing for others. Before bed, I checked my calendar. The coming weeks were mostly empty. No obligations written in pencil, ready to be erased if someone else's needs changed. Just my handwriting, firm INKED. As I turned off the light, I realized something else had shifted. I was no longer bracing myself for the next conversation. I was no longer rehearsing explanations in my head. He would call again. Of that, I was certain. When people sense control slipping, they reach for noise. But I was done responding to noise. I lay in the dark and felt an unfamiliar sensation settle over me. Not loneliness, not regret, space. And for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me. Asterisk, the reading of the will did not happen the way people imagine it does. There was no dramatic room full of relatives. No gasps, no raised voices. Real consequences rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, dressed in procedure. It happened on a Tuesday morning, in a modest conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. I was not there. I had already said what I needed to say while I was alive. What remained was administration. My son arrived early. He always does when he believes timing might work in his favor. He wore the same controlled expression I had seen for years. Polite, contained, prepared to negotiate. His wife sat beside him, posture straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. She avoided looking at anyone directly. They expected inheritance, not extravagance. Not indulgence, continuity. The quiet assumption that what had always been available would remain so, simply because it always had. The executor greeted them calmly. No sympathy. No warmth. Just process. The folder was opened. The first pages were simple. Burial instructions, modest, thoughtful, paid in advance. My son exhaled at that, a small sign of relief. Responsibility removed before it could inconvenience him. Then came the accounts. Properties listed. Funds allocated. Structures explained. each sentence precise. Final. My son leaned forward when he heard the word trust. His shoulders loosened. He glanced at his wife just briefly. A silent exchange of reassurance. Yes, the trust existed. Then the details followed. The trust named beneficiaries. Not him. A scholarship fund tied to a trade school. A community program for widowed women learning financial independence. A modest annual sum allocated to a purpose he once dismissed as small dash-minded dot. There was no mention of his name. He interrupted then just once. There must be a mistake, he said. His voice was controlled, but it cracked at the edges. I'm her only child. The executor looked at him steadily. There is no mistake. More pages followed. A personal account left to him. Not large, deliberately so. Enough to remind him he was not erased, but nowhere near enough to support the life he believed was his by default. Conditions were read aloud. No early access. No restructuring. No leverage. Silence filled the room. His wife shifted in her seat. Her face had gone pale. She asked a question about adjustments, about discretion. The executor shook his head once. These decisions were reviewed multiple times, he said. They are explicit. My son stared at the table. Not angry. Not yet confused, the kind of confusion that comes when the ground gives way without. Warning. The final document was read last. Not a letter. Not an apology. A statement that I had made my decisions without resentment. That love did not require proximity. That respect was not inherited, but earned through behavior. Not titles. That silence had once been my habit, and clarity was now my gift to myself. My son did not speak after that. When the meeting ended, he stood slowly. He did not argue. There was nothing left to argue with. Contracts do not care about raised voices. Outside, the day was ordinary. Traffic moved. People passed. Somewhere nearby, a couple laughed. Life did not pause for his understanding. Later, he would tell others he had been punished. But in that room, something else settled in him. He realized I had not acted out of anger. I had acted without him in mind. That was the moment the smirk disappeared. I am not there to see what comes after the reading of the will. That part belongs to others now. But I know how endings work. They do not shout. They settle. If I could speak one last time, it would not be to explain myself. I spent too many years doing that already. It would be to say this. I was never trying to hurt my son. I was trying to stop hurting myself. For a long time, I believed motherhood meant endurance, silence, adjustment. I believed that if I bent enough, love would eventually meet me halfway. It took most of my life to understand that love which only flows in one direction is not love at all. It is habit. I think of the woman I was in my 40s, working long days, counting money twice because mistakes were expensive. I think of myself in my 60s, still saying yes when my body and spirit were already saying no. I call that devotion. It was fear of being unnecessary. My son did not become the man he is overnight. Neither did I. We built this dynamic together, brick by brick, silence by silence. The difference is that I was the one who finally put the tools down. Some will say I went too far. Others will say I was finally brave. Neither matters much to me now. What matters is this. My life ended in alignment with itself. I left no dramatic messages, no emotional pleas, just order, just truth, just consequences written in ink. Instead of tears. I was excluded from a wedding. Once, quietly, casually, as if it were nothing, but I did not leave this world quietly. I left it. Hold. And if you are listening to this story as a woman who has swallowed too much for the sake of peace, let me say what no one said to me soon enough. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to be remembered, not for what you gave away, but for what you finally protected. That was the inheritance I kept. That was the inheritance I kept.